what am I actually working when I'm touching your body in the structural integration sessions and tune-ups? In the past, Ida Rolf, that developed this process, she felt that we were touching the fascia. So the fascia is the connective tissue in the body. If you do eat chicken or meat, with chicken, it's that filmy membrane, like tissue paper, that's over the muscle of the chicken, underneath the skin of the chicken, so that membranous layer. You can see that it's like tissue paper and it's flowy usually. Sometimes you will see that there's actually built up areas in this tissue, mainly, where the tissue actually connects onto the muscle. So in our body, we really want layers of fascia or connective tissue to be soft and filmy like they are on that raw chicken. So, Ida thought that we were touching fascia, and with the research that's out there, we now know that we, as a human with our strength, we're not able to actually separate the layers of that tissue. We need a lot of pressure to actually separate those layers. So with the latest research that's been done, we're understanding how those layers actually separate and how the tissue soften. But just going back to, what are we really touching? We're touching everything. It's like if I asked you to go in and pull the seed out of the middle of an orange, you can't just go in and touch that seed in the orange. You have to touch the outer peel of the orange. You have to touch that fibrous membrane that surrounds all of the sections. You have to touch all of the juicy middle section to get into that seed. So as a structural integrator, I am actually touching all of the tissue. I am touching the fascia, all of the other connective tissues, bones, ligaments, tendons, and muscle, all of it. We're touching all of it. But we do know from the latest research that the connective tissue in our body actually has a lot of receptors. So these receptors are part of the nervous system. Basically working like, your earbuds. You are, setting up on your phone your music. You want to hear that music, so you want to run that music from your phone into your ears so you can hear it. It's the same thing. The messaging or the receptors in the tissue are receiving messaging that's happening in your body. So it could be that you're feeling heat, or you're feeling cold, or maybe you're feeling a nice sensation from somebody touching your skin, or maybe you're feeling the sensation from somebody punching your skin, or a fall. So there's all kinds of different receptors in this connective tissue in your body, and all of those receptors are sending messages to your brain all of the time. It's like there's an earbud attached to every single receptor, sending a message to your brain. So we now know that when Ida Rolf thought she was affecting the fascia by physically getting in there and trying to touch it, we now know that that's not the case, because we physically can't do that. So we know that we're affecting those receptors, those touch receptors, those receptors that are sensing, oh, something wonderful is happening to this tissue. That messaging is sent to the brain, and that brain is actually getting the change to happen in the tissue. So what will happen with our tissue is, over the years, there's several things that can happen that can create this tissue to go from that papery, filmy, soft, flowing, ever-changing tissue to something that's really tight and stuck. And you know yourself that there's tissue in your body that's tight and stuck and restricted. You can feel it. You know things are not moving the way they should be moving. So we send the brain sends the messaging back to the tissue or to the body again to allow this tissue to soften when it gets the right messaging. So what we're really doing by affecting this tissue is we're actually updating the brain. We're updating the brain on all of those messages that the brain has received from maybe repetitive movement. If you work, a manufacturing job, that you're doing the same repetitive movement over and over and over, thousands of times potentially a day. Or it could be that you don't move a lot due to your pain possibly, or due to just being a sedentary person. We now know from research that this can actually create the tissue in the body to become just as stuck and dysfunctional as if you overworked it. Another reason why this tissue could become really stuck and restricted and stuck together is there could be old traumas that are happening, and that you're potentially reliving the trauma, perceiving that there could be a trauma. And this can actually create that tissue to become stuck again, or just as stuck as if you had a repetitive motion, that repetitive, highly repetitive motion, or an injury. An injury as well. If we have an injury, that tissue will actually restrict and build up in order to protect the area. It's a protective mechanism of the body. And the tissue will restrict in order to protect the area so the area can heal. But then after the healing takes place in 6 weeks, 2 months, everything is healed. Technically, the bone is healed, the soft tissue is healed. This area doesn't unrestrict. So can you imagine if you have an injury there, and all of the tissue, it's called connective tissue for a reason, because it connects. So maybe it connects from your shoulder down to your hip, which it does. If this area is restricted, can you imagine the pull that's happening on that shoulder and on the neck and on the back? All of those areas can be affected. If we can go in there and tap into those receptors and allow that tissue to release and become soft and resilient again, and have movement where it's easy movement and it's not a restricted movement, that body is actually going to realign, and that tissue is going to become soft and resilient, as opposed to being pulled down and restrictive. And it lets go, and then the neck can let go, the back can let go, everything can let go. And the thing we have to remember about this connective tissue is it surrounds every single thing in our body. It surrounds every single muscle cell. So not is it only a package that's surrounding the outside of the muscle, it is enmeshed in the whole muscle. So if there's any bit of restriction on the outside edge of the muscle, that's connected into the muscle. So again, the muscle is not going to work the way it's supposed to work. Maybe it's going to be pulled too long. Maybe it's going to be pulled slightly out of position. So with this work, we do 3 things. The 3 things are, we use a safe touch on the body. So we want to tap into those receptors in that tissue that are the good feeling receptors. We want to tap into those, and with the signals we want to get sent to the brain is, this feels really good. When you feel really good, what happens? Your body softens. Your brain just relaxes. Everything in your body just starts to let go. Now, we can't do that on our own necessarily without help if we have these restrictions in our tissue. So with my touch on that tissue, sending the message into the brain, we can actually get that change to happen. So the other thing that happens is when we've had an injury, or maybe we've been sedentary, or maybe we've had cancer, or maybe we've, had these emotional traumas that have created these issues in these tissues, and the part of the brain, the somatosensory cortex, that actually connects to every single part of the body. There's a part of my brain that actually connects to my shoulder. In this connection, my brain is actually telling my shoulder how to move. But if we have an injury there, and those receptors and that messaging gets murky, which it does, you don't understand how to move your shoulder properly anymore. your brain doesn't understand or just can't do that 100% movement anymore because it doesn't understand how to do it. So when I'm on the tissue in those areas and I ask you to reach up or make a movement with your arm, we're actually reprogramming that part of the brain. So it's twofold. We're touching that tissue, we're getting into those receptors that are feel good, and we're telling the brain, reach up, reach up, reach up. So the brain is hearing that, feeling it happening, and feeling the softness and the touch on the tissue, and then change is going to happen. And it happens really quickly. We can get change happening in the very first session that you arrive in the clinic. The third thing that makes this different is we educate you on how pain works, how that part of the brain, which I just talked about, connects back to the body, and how they need to work in tandem, and how that system needs to be updated if there's been previous issues with, injuries or emotional trauma or, sedentary lifestyle or habitual patterns. We need that updating. So this is a threefold process, and this is the latest pain science research, the new science that has been budding for the last few years and is full blown now. We understand that there needs to be these three key components in order for this tissue, this connective tissue in your body, to change, to soften, to become resilient like you were when you were a child. Think about children and how resilient they are and how they can squat and bend and do back bends and somersaults, and everything is soft and flowing and squishy and mushy and resilient, and it just goes and flows. So this is what we're actually working, and so this is, this makes it a little bit different than a lot of other things that are out there. And not that any other modality is better or less than, or this one is not better or less than anything else out there. It just works really differently than, some of the other things. So therefore it's, it's just a whole different modality and a whole different scope and thought process on what can really happen and the changes that can happen. So that's all about connective tissue. I hope you can join me again. Thank you.